If everybody can say welcome to everyone in the chat, that would be ace, and maybe share like your location, because we've got apparently quite an international audience, which is quite fun. So we are following the smart cookies principles, where basically we invite one person to talk about their area of expertise or their area of interest. It's going to be a 20-minute talk from Romaric Pascal today, who's one of Cookies HQ developers, our lead front-end developer and champion of accessibility. We are going to go for a 20-minute talk and then a 10-minute QA. So feel free during the talk to ask your questions, whether that's in the chat, and if you're using the chat, please move the option to panelist and audience so everybody can see the questions. And we will have reserved 10 minutes after the talk to answer your questions. So without further ado, Romaric, it's over to you. If you want to share your screen, I'm going to mute myself and stop talking.
Cool, let's do that. Can you see my screen? Should be like one slide on it. Cool, let's get going then. So thanks everyone for joining. As Nick said, I'm a front-end developer at Cookies HQ, been doing that for like 10-ish years, a bit more now, front-end developer. And I've been nagging Cookies HQ for now almost 4 years about making the products we build more accessible, because I like the web. I find it's a great platform for reaching a lot of people, and I care a lot about how things are built on it. Before we dive further, there we go. A reminder that the slides are online, so there should be a message on the slide on the chat with the link. There's a lot of content with plenty of links pointing you to further like content to look into. So if you go to that address, you'll get the slides that you can follow and like navigate out of. And so back to the topic, I care a lot about the web, and what makes me sad is that the way we build the web is we make it in a really bad state. Over the top 1 million home pages, there's been like a study that found that 97.4% of them had accessibility errors, automatically detectable accessibility errors, which if you think about it, that leaves all the errors that you can't detect automatically. And on top of that, of those technical errors, the way we design and build the content that are on our website introduces more barriers. We make convoluted UX flows that confuse people. We put distracting elements and animation next to the task that people are trying to achieve or the text that they're trying to read. We forget to put transcripts and captions on like videos we put on our websites, and many more ways to put barriers into people. And at the end of the day, that excludes them. And the message it sends, whether it's intentional or not, is that we don't care about their needs. If it's on a public website, that means we don't care about them getting our content, about them like being able to participate in our business. And even in internal tools, that means that we don't care about hiring people with those needs. It excludes people, and I think we can all agree that excluding people is pretty crap. More than crap, it's discriminatory because it excludes a lot of people with disabilities that like won't necessarily use a screen and a mouse to browse the web, and those barriers especially affect that. The thing is, like, that should be just enough for us to be, okay, let's do the right thing, let's build the web correctly. Unfortunately, in the current environment, like which is pretty fast-paced and led by business, that rarely ever cuts it. If your business is socially minded, that's fine enough and as an argument, but often we're going to need more. So when that doesn't cut it, we can always remind that like it's going to help everyone. It's not a massively better argument, but increasing accessibility is also going to help everybody, all the users of your website. It's also more people that you might imagine. Like disability is something that's kind of invisibilized in our society, and there's actually 22% of the UK population that's that said that they had a disability in a recent government survey. Not all will be impaired when it comes to browsing the web, but on top of those people, you need to add people that have temporary disabilities, like recovering from an eye operation, or situational disabilities, like trying to browse the web on a shaky train. So that adds up to the people that we need to cater for. And finally, we can also say that there's legal requirements in the UK through the Equality Act from 2010. All over the world, most countries have some kind of laws around discrimination based on disability. And there's also many more arguments in the link at the bottom if you want to further the case. But I think the most striking argument when it comes to business, it's unfortunate, but it's that it makes business sense, that it's unfortunate that we have to resort to that to convince people. So here there's a tweet from Leonie Watson, who uses a screen reader. Note on the HelloFresh UK site, if you're using a screen reader and are having problems using this website, please call 020-something for assistance. I do use a screen reader. I did have problems. I will not be calling because your nearest competitor has a more accessible site. And that's what it means. Caring for accessibility means more business for you because the people whose needs are catered for, they're going to come to your website. They're not going to come to your competitors to your competitors' site that they can browse. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of human work to do. Artificial intelligence has some promising things in terms of detecting what's on the screen and providing information. However, it's not quite there yet. And there's been a rise in solutions that sell you kind of magic accessibility compliance. I'll let you follow that link to understand why they're not so magic and actually in some kinds impair browsing, impair the accessibility of your website. All those arguments, they're very important because they're the ones that are going to help build the case for accessibility. And that means that when we build a product, the people that need to hold that case are project management and sales. As much as I can argue for doing things accessibly, I need the support from the project management and sales so that accessibility is there in the end. And it's not to sell accessibility as something more. The idea here is to defend that, as a baseline, our products should be accessible. We should not remove accessibility to cut corners, make things cheaper, ship them faster. It's part of the features. It's not something that we add on top of it. And that means we need to gather requirements for it. And that once the features are done, we need to record bugs against them and prioritize those bugs properly. Those last 2 points means that we need to know what to do, what it means what are the requirements for something to be accessible, what constitutes a bug regarding accessibility. The best way to know is to involve disabled users. They will know best the barriers that they face when browsing, and that's very important because for us, how much we can learn to use a screen reader, learn to browse by keyboards, doing it as a developer and doing it as your main way of browsing day in, day out is very different. And so it's very important to involve those people, especially if you're trying a new UX pattern or innovating for disability. It's even more important to make sure that what you're innovating actually helps and does not impair. And because they're going to be bringing time and expertise, it's important to compensate those people fairly. Because it's quite a stepping stone, and arguably we haven't yet had the chance to take it with cookies, we can follow best practices. So there's a set of guidelines, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There's a little less than 80 of them, which will help you with criteria that help your website accessibility. So they've got 3 levels from which you can go little by little. And it's referenced in many, many legislations, especially their 2nd level, as kind of a baseline for especially public websites being accessible. Those guidelines, they affect the whole scope of building the product. The design side, where you'd want to make sure that your layout is structured and consistent so that people can understand it clearly and are not thrown off when navigating from one page to another. Sizing and spacing is very important for text to be readable, but also for controls like buttons and form fields so that people can interact with them, they're big enough to be interacted with and they're spaced enough that they don't make mistakes. And finally, those layouts, I think in 2021, it's kind of the case that we plan them for responsive, but responsive in our minds is still a lot about mobile and maybe reducing features because people are browsing in a mobile context or whatever. Those mobile layouts, they're also going to appear for people that have a high zoom on desktop. And that means that your mobile site should offer the same functionality as the desktop site, maybe through slightly different paths, but people should be able to do the same thing. Then there's not just the layout, it's the appearance of things. The fonts we choose will affect accessibility, helping or not helping to read what's on the screen. Making sure we put information not just through colors. Red is danger or bad in certain culture, but if you just highlight something in red, this information is going to be missed by people. So adding an icon or another kind of graphic element will help understand. And finally, making sure there's enough contrast for things to be seen on the screen, the text, the graphics, the buttons, the form fields. Contrasted though, that doesn't mean boring. It doesn't mean black on white or just very dull color. You can be very bold and choose, like Tatiana Mack, an American designer, on her website, a bright blue background, a bright pink, and white. And all that matters actually, the most important thing is that the content is contrasted enough. So the pink is not quite there yet in terms of contrast, but what matters is that all the rest of the website, the white text on the blue background, is contrasted enough and people do have access to the information on the website. And then our websites are not static. We build them to go from one page to another for people to interact with them. And I think one of the main thing we do is we're very quick to think about mouse hovering on stuff, drag and drop, or touch, putting like gestures like swiping and pinch zoom. But actually, it pays to think of those interactions keyboard first. I find a button, a form field, I fill it, I click the button, and then I go to something else. It's not necessarily the fastest way, and it doesn't mean that all the interactions need to go with that, but there needs to be that keyboard first way as a baseline, and then shortcuts of like, oh, and then I can hover on this to go faster. I can make that gesture to make that action faster, but the baseline of keyboard interaction should be there. We need to be mindful of automatic changes like flashing a pop-up in the head of people while they're trying to achieve something, or making messages notification disappear too quickly so that people can't read them. And being also mindful of animations to not distract people, not make them sick, or cause seizures through them. So that's the design. One part that we don't necessarily think about regarding accessibility is content. The kind of regular content of our website, the copy of it, making sure it's structured and broken down properly so that people can comprehend it more easily. Making sure the labels of links, buttons, and all kinds of controls are meaningful, especially links, click here links or this page links are not helping anybody. And when it comes to the vocabulary, paying a bit of attention to not excluding disabled people further through ableist language, to not exclude people by putting plenty of technical jargon in the text, or writing with a much higher reading age than the audience is intended. But there's also a lot of hidden content to put on, not necessarily hidden, forgotten content to put on our websites. And these are media alternative. Not everybody will be able or will, or it won't be the best way for everybody to consume content as images or graphs for which having a textual description will be necessary. Having transcripts next to audio and video so that people can read instead of hearing, and closed captions for video the same. Especially for images, context is going to be very important, and that's also why AI is going to be tough to AI to actually get there. So if we take that picture of like a red panda on the left, there's many ways that it can be captioned depending on on which page it's going to sit. Maybe there's enough information on the side, and it's perfectly fine to have an empty text, if like an empty alternative text, if there's enough content on the side that the image is decorative. That's the first option. Maybe you're writing an article about like 7 animals that are going to lift up your day, and you can caption it, such a cute red panda crouching over a trunk, preferably describing why it's so cute. But maybe you're writing a story about that panda, and it's illustrating a part of that story. And in that case, you might want to express that the panda is crouching on a trunk. What will it do next? And then finally, once you got the design and the content sorted, you need to build the site. And like, there's again, a lot of things to think about. The base part is to provide proper semantics. They're the key things that are going to make sure that the content is not only going to be visible on the screen, but also will reach assistive technology like screen readers. It starts with a strong use of HTML and ARIA. HTML elements, their attributes properly, and ARIA extra attributes that are going to add more semantics to the HTML. Especially something that's often forgotten in apps is to have proper headings and landmarks through the page. They're key for people to quickly skim the page through assistive technology, looking at all the headings that are there, all the main sections of the page. The way a sighted user will identify, oh, I've got a big block there, and bold text here and here. That's what's going to help go through the page. And finally, making sure the elements are labeled, have a name, and that their state is conveyed. In practice, if we take that example of a little dummy survey asking what's your favorite cookie flavor between Nutella, coconut, and pecan as radio buttons, the focus at the moment, which is where the user is when they navigate through screen reader and keyboard, is on the first answer, Nutella, which is selected. And all those semantics and labeling, they're what enable a screen reader to tell users that at the moment, the focus is on the radio button. So that's the semantics part, using the right element in the HTML, that the name of the option is Nutella. So that's the part about labeling, making sure that things have name, and that option is selecting, so conveying the right state. And again, the semantics around radio button also let people know that it's one of 3 radio buttons and they don't have like a massive list to go through. So we got content nicely marked up in the HTML, and we need to implement the design. And the first thing to do to make sure of is the design is adaptable to screen sizes. So that's the responsive bit, not forgetting that people are going to zoom to the orientation of the device, because not everybody is going to be able to tilt their phone or their tablet. Making sure it adapts to different font size and line height, because some people have different settings in their browser to help reading. And making sure it adapts to high contrast, to reduced motion, to dark mode, all sorts of preferences that people can set in their browsers because it helps them browse the web. Another key thing when it comes to styling the content is making sure that the elements are reachable the way they should be, so that anything that's on the screen visible can be reached by keyboards and assistive technology. And also that, like, maybe more importantly, that the things that are not on the screen or maybe slightly obscured, like by an overlay behind a model, cannot be reached by those technologies. And finally, making sure that when you reach those elements through keyboard or assistive technology, things flow in the right order. So if you're in a top left, bottom right language like English, that like when you tap through the page or focus through the page, you follow those directions. And then again, we build interactive websites. So when it comes to the building part, we need to pay attention to interactions. The focus to start with, which is the indicator of where people are on the page, making sure that it's visible so they know where they are on the page, that we don't lock them in a part of the page, and that we pay attention to where it is before, making sure that the elements that are going to start an interaction can be focused, and after, making sure that after the interaction, we haven't lost the focus to God knows where on the page. We need to be mindful of activation, like how interactions get started. So once you got the focus on the element, which keys are going to be able to trigger the interaction. A quick example is pressing space on a button. That's something that's expected when someone knows they're on the button. If that doesn't work, they're going to be, that's a barrier that you put in their way when they browse the website. And finally, interactions usually have some kind of feedback on it, especially if they're long, you're going to have some loading, maybe they're going to succeed or error. And this needs not only to be shown on the screen, but also conveyed to assistive technologies. And once all it's built, things need to be tested. And again, the best way to know if it does work for disabled users is to ask them, because again, they know best the barriers. But actually, they should be the last one to test, because their role should be to give us bugs that only they can see, can identify, because they're highly competent in the way they browse the web. Anything that we can pick up beforehand should be picked up beforehand through manual testing. So that's quite a list there, in order of like kind of what I'd say the easiest to do to like the hard, like the most cumbersome to do. Checking that headings and landmarks are like there and relevant and in the right order, makes sense. There's like 2 browser extensions that can quickly, you open them on the page and you can see what's happening. Checking color contrasts, making sure that the colors are contrasted enough, ideally at the design stage, not at the testing stage at the end. Quickly navigating through the keyboard, tabbing through the screen, checking if you can see where you are, if you don't get logged, that you can activate the things properly. Popping up a screen reader, it's built in by default on the Mac. Windows also brings one by default, and there's a free one to download. Popping it open, seeing how things are read, what's appearing in the shortcut menus regarding like headings, landmarks, and all the other shortcuts that people use for browsing with those devices. And then finally, going through the whole web content accessibility guideline checklist on the main pages of your site. Obviously, a much bigger step to take. There's a bit of automation that can be done there, with a bit of a caveat though. It's not going to catch all the errors. So depending on the tool you're going to be using, you're going to have between 13 and 40% of errors. The UK government, the GDS team, made a review of like different technologies and how many errors they were able to find out. And all those errors, in any case, they kind of need a bit of human review. There's going to be a few false positives. There's going to be a few false negatives. There's errors that can't be caught. But it's not a replacement for humans. It's accelerating the human testing. And finally, accessibility extends beyond your website. You'll likely have some social media presence, posting images, make sure you label them with alternative text and use proper capitalization in hashtags so that people can read them. If you provide apps or documents, making sure that those are accessible too, both can be made accessible generally. And even offline, whether it's your premises, the product you build, think about accessibility. It's obviously a different set of requirements than on the web, but the accessibility doesn't stop at your website. So where do we go from there? The first thing I'd say is to start, to get started. You don't need to like overhaul your company to do accessibility. If you're a designer, on the next design you do, you pay a bit more attention to contrast and accessibility wins. If you're a copywriter, on the next piece of content you write, you make sure that your links are meaningful, and that's a win again. As a developer, you pay attention to the labeling of your buttons on the next site you build, and again, that's a step forward. As a tester, you start looking into those accessibility features and start putting up bugs, and again, we're going to move forward on that forward too. This can feel overwhelming. There's admittedly a lot to go through. You don't want to think about like, tomorrow I'm going to be 100% accessible, because first, it's a massive jump and it's like it's too big a step to take. And also because given the spectrum of the way people access the web, it's a very, very high bar to take. But what you can do is to go more accessible than what you were doing yesterday. And then tomorrow you try to do better. And the day after you do better. And it's going to snowball. And accessibility is going to improve. As we've seen, there's like a lot of work for everybody. So best to involve everyone. If it's a concerted effort, it's going to yield bigger gains than if it's not. And especially if it's taken into account early in the process, it's easier and cheaper to make it happen. We're going to have to learn new things. It's stuff that's not been necessarily taught to us, so that we've not really encountered when we were teaching ourselves. So I've put a few links here to resources to like help you find more knowledge about users' needs, tools, and techniques. And then finally, I'd like to leave you with a reminder that like we're the ones building the web, we're the one making the products, and it's our responsibility to not exclude people. Thank you very much for your attention. I'd be happy if you have questions afterwards to be reached on Twitter at Romaric Pascal. And if you want to reach us, you can find us on Twitter at the Cookies HQ or hello@cookieshq.co.uk by email. Thanks. Yep, I think you're muted still, Nick.
There we go. I was trying to find the microphone. Thank you very much, Romaric, for that. I mean, I know this candid phrase that's been floated around in cookies, and where we want to make the web a better place, and that's the rule that we take when we try to build apps. Now, it's also true, and it has to be said, because between Romaric and I, there has been sometimes some pushback onto where does that like, hang on, does that really matter here? Like, do we really need to like spend a whole day just to fix these particularly component accessibility on this side or something like that? So it's always interesting discussions like there. In my view, obviously accessibility is something that we should all care about. There's also involvement from a business side, from development side, from deadlines, from, as Romaric said, there's loads of involvement from a lot of people. I do share your view though, where I think what has been transformative for me personally in cookies is when we started to not see accessibility just as a front-end job, because it's easy to see, like, basically it's a front-end job, like the front end will build things accessibly, but we need the support for the whole team basically to be there and to make sure that all the right decisions are made before that reach the front end basically. And lastly, it's interesting because one of my view of accessibility is it could be a completely selfish one, but I do find that when an app is built with accessibility in mind, typically it's much easier to use. Like, as a completely able person without any disabilities, if I take an app that hasn't taken into consideration accessibility and I'm installing a form where there's no labels and it's all place orders or whatever, and the buttons are hidden until you fill up all the forms, or the errors are just disappearing after seconds that they're flashing on, whatever, I'm just get lost. I just get lost. And it's not because I don't know how to use the web. It's not all that. It's just that it doesn't make sense. And since building apps with accessibility in mind makes it easier for everybody, I think it's a win for everyone. And I think that's the culprit is, like, accessibility can be viewed obviously as in allowing more people to consume your content, allowing more people to consume your website or your app, but you will actually have a better experience for everybody, and you're not actually going to diminish the experience for other people. And I think that was one of the scared. I think people are scared about, oh, we're going to have to be accessible, therefore we're going to have to make concessions and have a less capable website or a less trendy website or a less nice website, whatever that is. It's not that. And that's what I think over the past few years I've discovered with you in the team is being accessible doesn't mean you have to have a lot of trade-offs. It just means you just do things differently, and you can still have the exact same experience. You just make sure that everybody has an experience that is nice for them, basically.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big things that, like, people are just not very aware of what it means to be accessible. They see, oh, we need to do accessibility. A lot of it is brought through like a fear of lawsuits, especially in America, where you're like, oh, we need to comply and be accessible, and kind of done, not going backwards, but like you kind of don't really want to do it. It's like imposed on you. Well, actually, if you think it from the start, you're not gonna, as you said, you're not gonna put like less feature or worse feature than the other website. You're actually gonna build your website better, and it's gonna work much better for people that do need like the features that you're putting, but also everybody that's going to use your website. And that's think that there's a lot of awareness to be risen around accessibility to like kind of break that fear a bit, that like it's not you're not going to like get a subpar website by making it accessible. You can have it just as nicely designed. You can have like just as nice interactions in your app as in like most of the apps. But yeah, behind the scene, it's also going to be better for everyone, for like people that do need to use screen readers or others.
So we got a few questions, and I think I'm going to give an answer to the first one, and then I will let you answer with your follow-up, probably longer. But so the first question that we had was, if someone is just getting started with addressing the accessibility of their website, where is the best place to start and how to prioritize? And actually, my answer may not be that relevant, but I know that what has helped me a lot as somebody that is like aware, but certainly not an expert. And unfortunately for the team, sometime I will dive into code still. And what has helped me a lot is to trust and use frameworks. And in that regards, I do find still the granddaddy of all front-end framework like Bootstrap. Bootstrap in itself is not more accessible than anything else, but their documentation puts an emphasis on accessibility on almost every single component. And I do find that by simply reading, actually taking the time to read the documentation and understand how area label works and how enhancement works and all these kind of things, that has helped me to make better decisions in the way I build things. And that's certainly my first step, is like, if I'm building something new, regardless if I use Bootstrap as a framework or not, I will actually go to the Bootstrap documentation, because I know that if I have an error label or an error message or button or something like that, I know that they will have something interesting to say about accessibility on their documentation. And I really, really welcome you to read the Bootstrap doc, because they are really good for that matter. But Romaric, you probably have much better answer than me. Then go and check Bootstrap, basically.
I'd say that it depends. Like, it depends, yeah, if you're building the website or working on an existing website to start with, because that's going to be two very different situations. So if you're building the website, picking the right tools, like making sure you use like frameworks and libraries that you've checked a bit the accessibility, is going to be helpful. If the website is already built, there's like on that 1 million web page survey, one of the most common errors, well, 3 of the most common errors were around labeling. So I think that's one of the big points that a lot of websites miss, is like having mislabeled images, having missing labels on images, on buttons, on links, all those kind of things. So making a round of that, and then yeah, kind of getting curious about like the accessibility guidelines. You pick one of the criteria, maybe one you feel is the most helpful, and then you move forward one of the lower level one, and then you tackle that, and then you pick another one, and then you tackle that, and you go like one by one, and little by little, the accessibility of your site is going to improve. If you want a bit of help, there's a tool called Accessibility Insights. I think it's listed in the list from the gov.uk. If it's not, I'll put a link afterwards, which is an automated tool that does kind of the review. So it's going to tell you like the errors that you actually have at the moment, and I think helps you go through a manual review afterwards. So that can be quite handy if you want to get started, more than like some of the other tools that just gives you a report and leave you a bit more clueless about what to do.
There's a very big, thank you, Adam, for that very open-ended question. How can we push the web to be more accessible by default? How do you answer that? But it basically says, I know from building iOS apps that it's hard, but not impossible to make your app inaccessible. And it's true that iOS will have accessibility by default when you build with the native components. But how can we make the case for the web to be more accessible by default?
I think there's a lot of kind of teaching to do here. Obviously, us making the web right now, we need to make sure we build it the best we can. So we need to teach ourselves, but I think it's mostly for like the generations to come. I don't know, I was taught coding at school, and nowhere in my curriculum was accessibility ever mentioned. So it's something that we need to see more in like the curriculums at school or at boot camps or wherever like people teach themselves. And it's also in companies having someone championing accessibility, pushing. It's not like the most fun job. I cannot say that it's every day nice to be like, oh, we need to think about that. It's a lot of often the same reminders, but little by little, you kind of stop doing those reminders because your team has understood that like color contrast is important. And so you can start reminding them about something else. So I think it's a lot of like grinding of, advocating for accessibility, and also understanding that like, it's not just kind of technical about the products we built, it's in our everyday lives, in like the things we interact with are built, and just, being aware of it, being vocal about it, and trying to, teach the others and pass the word around.
There are two questions, one by Johnny and one by Joe, which kind of like touch on the same point. So Johnny says, the UK Gov suggests a list of maybe 7 screen readers that your website accessibility should be compatible with. How can you effectively build for that compatibility standard without cutting too much into development and time? And Joe is basically asking, if your team cares about accessibility, but the client timeframe budget means they might not so much, how do you surface the value to them and their business? And I think the two are, the way I see them two related is like, how do you make it work with the constraints of deadline, deliveries, and time? I think in my point of view, because I'm more on the sales side in cookies, and I would like to say for Joe's question, which is, what do you do about the client that doesn't care about accessibility? Is almost sometimes you don't even bring it up. It's like, if it's the way you build the app, you just try to do what you have to do, basically. The only moment when it starts to be brought up is when either their branding is not accessible, like you don't have enough contrast and you have to provide the solution to that, or they want a fancy, I don't know, component on an interface that will not be accessible and it has to be raised. But I think, in my point of view, I will mention that we try to build apps like in an accessibility manner, but it's not something that you remind every day, or you say, if you build it accessibly, it will add 20% on the scope of the budget. It's more, we're trying to refine internally our processes. So when we build something, there is some level of accessibility in mind from the get-go. And then you enter those discussions only when something is actually not accessible. Well, at least that's my point of view. But how would you answer to that, Romaric?
Yeah, I think what you say makes sense for like the question about like how you bring it up to client. The answer is you don't. Same as a developer, if you're on a team and your manager doesn't care about accessibility, if you can fit it within the constraints and stuff like that, you don't bring it until like it actually needs to be brought up, that like that component, for example, is not accessible. You just do it. You just build the things you need to build in an accessible manner. You just design the things you need to design in an accessible manner. And then for those moments where there's going to be clash about that, it's unfortunate, but sometimes you're going to have to lose some. It's very sad when that happens. But like when I bring up accessibility and sometimes there's too many constraints, you log that like it's not accessible. You log that like, if possible, we're going to make something in the future. But that's the reality of things. Hopefully, like little by little, like clients are going to get more mindful and aware of that, and it's going to be easier discussions to have. But yeah, I think the idea for like how do you deal with that is just, you just do it, and like when it happens, you push for it and you get ready to like not win every time, because as sad as it is, that's how it happens.
But I think The clients are now more aware than certainly they used to be, say, 5 years ago, about the requirement of accessibility. And they're not aware because of accessibility itself. I think it's all the discussion around inclusivity, though, that has started to open up the discussion about accessibility. So the way that we need, whether you are an employer, whether you are a business, whether you provide a website, whatever, you need to be more inclusive to people. And that could be anything from a gender or gender perception, or a skin color, or accessible websites, everything. Oops, sorry, I've got obviously a phone call. These talk about inclusivity, I think, has opened up the chat around accessibility, or at least that's the way I see the discussions going with clients. Or maybe it's just because we have the best clients. I don't know.
We do have clients.
Yeah. There is a ton of discussions around legal requirements, and people having had basically just people saying, hey, just share them, people being fined because their website were not accessible. So there's a lot of discussions in the chat about that. And basically, I think we are now due to finish this talk. It was very, very nice to have you, Romaric. For everybody else, I think Emily is going to drop again this link to the newsletter so we can send you the recording on YouTube. And please feel free to just hit either Romaric or myself on any social media. And if there's like a follow-up discussions, we will continue that discussion there. I forgot at the intro about the shameless plug that we are recruiting. We are actually heavily recruiting. And if you're in this chat, you're probably the kind of people that we want to recruit because you are interested in the way we do things. So we are recruiting UI people, UX people, front-end developers, and back-end developers. So if you're interested, you can hit me on nicholas@cookieshq.co.uk, or you can head to the website. There's a career page. So if you're interested to work in a team that actually cares about what they do, please hit me up. Romaric, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
I see you on the other side of the team stand-up. That's very bizarre. Thank you, everybody. We see you again all in about 2 weeks with another, in 2 weeks actually, with another Smart Cookies. This time completely different because it's going to be around how to be an investable entrepreneur. So thanks a lot, and see you all again very soon. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.